like it though.
I know, because I'm shaving, I got a nice shirt on, and that's only 1 day of sleep deprivation. Usually, if it's about 4, you start
Mm.
looking like a street boxer that's been hit too many times. You get these dark circles that go all the way across. Like you literally look like something else besides what you're supposed to be doing. Um, okay, broadcasting out, and we have people on YouTube, so this is live. Hello, everyone. This is, and you're gonna have to help me with the number. No, I already know it. It's remotely interesting. Bop 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 dong. every number has like that building up, and then I have the bong at the end.
And then
Sure, we can do
and
that.
then now we should get our participants to guess what was the number that you just showed them.
Yes, I don't even tell what it is. It's like, all right, we'll do it again. Right? I'll get the camera. Bop 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 bong. There you go. So that's the number that we have. And programming note for everyone that's been with us for a while. I have to let you know that we did retire the pink poop emoji. Sadly enough, it was overdue. Well, actually, overdue. I think it was momentous. I think the artistic license that we gave the Yes, we do. My consultant here is talking in the background. The artistic endeavor we did with a tribe platform of kind of putting it there, there were too many people shouting for its retirement, so we had to put it away, and instead we adopted a new one that was comprehensive to Sandy's ability to speak to whispered elephants, and kind of getting that proper color there. So we now have a new look, a new logo, new graphics, new everything. So we're starting anew almost. Um, so everyone that's on the Zoom, hello Carlos, hello Alex, hello Oliver, bonjour, hello Alberto. Man, what are you doing? You got so many things to have your plate. What are you doing listening to us? Seriously, do the recording, man. The recording. You can do it on demand. You're registered. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that route. Okay, let's get to brass tacks and get going with this. So this is a episode about combining design, smashing design sprints, and prototyping. And it's going to be kind of me doing a lot of talking, but rather than just having you stare at this ugly mug for like 50 minutes while I'm describing something, I'm going to opt to kind of take some of my thoughts around what we're doing with this thing called the dash, and showcasing what we've been doing in mural, and then also give you some thinking around the foundation of why I'm doing it in the first place. And Sandy is here to make sure that I don't babble incessantly, because as I've probably mentioned, I don't remember if I did, I'm really sleep deprived right now, so I have the tendency to ramble. So she's going to kind of keep me keep me in check.
Yes.
But she also has critical questions. And what I'll do is at different points in this show, I'll reach out to the chats and to the Q&A and to YouTube. So if there's questions or clarifications or observations about something that I'm putting here, please ask them and let us know what you're thinking. Also, I have to caveat that what we're going to be saying here is that these are my own opinions. These are not the opinions of others. So a lot of what I'm going to say about both design sprints and prototyping are complementary, but they're also going to be critical. So I'd want to make sure that what I'm presenting here is just what's been in my head and in mural, and trying to actually make sense of it. Okay, everybody clear? Sandy, are you good with
Yes.
it?
I thought
All
you were
right.
gonna get them raise their hand or something.
No. Did everybody tell us what they're from?
Okay.
Can you get the city and state? And that would be really nice. Yeah, it's customary to do that when usually you're the person talking, but it's fine. I've just been used to it so much that I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, Yasser's
Cool.
raising his hand. Yasser actually is going to get on my case for starting late. That's the one thing I remember from him, is he's very much about being on time. So anyway, enough babble. Let's get going. I'm going to
Yes.
share my screen and go into, make sure I'm on the right tab here. So I got a ton of them. Okay. So I'll share my screen on this side, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an illustration of the thinking around how this dash thing came about. So the dash is basically a process that's meant to test the desirability of an idea in 5 hours or less. So in essence, it's very much like pretotyping is, because the whole idea is that you're testing the market for something very fast and in a fast and cheap way. So you can get answers really fast and so whether or not your idea makes sense. But what I've attempted to do here is to take some of the concepts of design sprints and some of the workings of pretotyping, and instead of kind of finding where they fit together, like does pretotyping kind of is it executed right after like the winning solution sketches? Is it done before a design sprint is even done? I wanted to tackle the question of what if you transmuted them both in the same space to complement one another to get a better result on the end result, which is going to be an experiment you're going to drive into the market. So what I'm going to attempt to do here is kind of explain my thinking around what we're doing with the dash, and then go into some examples for people to kind of see. So at any point in this presentation or what I'm doing, feel free to make comments in chat or to post something in Q&A or raise your hand. We're not above not bringing people into the conversation to give their opinions. If they want to get on camera, that's totally fine too. So let's start first with design sprints. This is something I came from a background with and still do. And I'm going to use Post-it notes to kind of explain what I'm going to be going through. So with the design sprint process, when I took a look at it from like even the 4 or the 5 day starting point, and I looked at it from the perspective of someone who does pretotyping, there's a lot of things that happen at the very beginning. Sometimes there's a bit of problem framing. Other times there's going to be a little bit of discovery when it comes to understanding who you're going to be designing for, doing the design sprint with, understanding subject matter experts, and getting all this basically subject matter expert interviews. There's a lot of things that happen before the actual design sprint actually happens. So if the design sprint is here, and I'll give it a different color, you may have some things that kind of inform this design sprint. Then afterwards, after the design sprint is done, maybe you do an iteration sprint. Yeah, exactly. You can do that. What Sandy's doing is perfect. You can kind of complement what I'm talking about or add your own. So there's kind of a general kind of progression of things. Sometimes it's just a week. Sometimes it's a whole month, depending on the engagement and who is with. One of the things that I have a problem with design sprints is that a lot of what we do here in this space around problem framing, discovery, and so on, media interviews, is to inform us and to get a better idea of what we're talking about. But some of the criticism of this is that unless you're embedded in the culture or the society or the issues that people are dealing with, you're really just on the fringes of understanding and speculating on what you're supposed to be tackling in the design sprint. It's not a bad thing that you're trying to inform yourself and get informed, but you're trying to make educated decisions within the process. One of the things I did with pretotyping is that pretotyping tends to throw all of this out, meaning that it's all third-party data. It tends to be something where it's not coming from straight from the source, which is the people you're going to serve. So unless this is kind of interviewing users, that's still going to be something where it's somebody else's opinions. It's not, they can tell you anything they want to, but they're not going to commit to anything at the time. So what I tended to do with this, when I was thinking about the dash, is like this kind of first part takes up a lot of time to kind of get together, form, and everything else. Let's hypothetically say that all of this stuff that you do in the very beginning to kind of discover is taken out. And part of the reason why I wanted to do that was that in the blue book, if you recall, in the design sprint or the Jake Knapp's book Sprint, he goes into an example with his I think it's the hotel robot that basically serves you different utilities, stuff like that. Everyone that was involved with that project was the most informed and had the most skin in the game in regards to what they were creating. And the design sprint was meant to kind of test to see if what they were going to create was going to be viable for the audience that they were meant to serve. The thing that was, because he was in Google Ventures, he was closest to the people that knew the most and had the most to lose. With the design sprints that I've been a part of, whether they've been virtual or otherwise, I don't have I didn't sense that people had that skin in the game like that. They weren't invested as much. They were going through the design sprint process as a learning experience and to understand the process of going through it. So that they want to take it back to their job and do design sprints and learn about them and execute them for design and for production, then it's perfectly fine. You can just take those. And I did it on my own job with some of the people that I managed. But I thought that the examples in the book gave evidence or lended evidence to the idea that unless the people involved are so close and so much part of what they're talking about, they live and breathe it, that what you're going to be producing in the design sprint is going to have a problem exiting out like actually performing at the end. What I mean by that is that you can have this great idea, like we get in all of our GVDSs, we have these ideas that come out. And usually this time around, we asked for some sort of sponsor, somebody to take it forward. If that person isn't around, then it's a convenient exercise to really be able to relate to your team members. But the reality is that thing is not going to go forward, even if you have a plan of some type. You have to have the right engagement model for it to actually work into a business or a roadmap or something else. So my struggle, at least in my thought, is that if you were to take all of this out and assume that people going into a design sprint were the people that knew the most about their experience based on their firsthand knowledge, you have to start with that. So this dash process assumes that even if people are new to everything and don't know anything, the most valuable data, if you take a pretotyping hat on, is going to be your own experience, your own data, Yoda, as Alberto Savoia says, your own data that you're going to derive from your own experiments. And if that is the case, that's also going to be a discovery on the kind of audience that you're serving, as well as the environment they're going to be living in, all of which you are assuming before you even get into your experiment what that is. You're speculating based on your best knowledge about what it is. That isn't to say third-party data isn't valuable or can inform, but I just don't think it should be emphasized the way the design sprint currently is. So with this dash process, I said, okay, save a lot of time, toss all that out. And a more important thing to do is to have a group conversation about what things you want to kind of explore. And if they're completely new to one another and they're coming together like I usually do with a dash, if there's not something already preset, it may be asking the question of what would be a really interesting question to answer, or what would be something that you would really be intrinsically motivated to do. Because sometimes and it was mentioned in the Write It book by Alberto Savoia, at the very back, one second, I'll be there in a second. You really want to be able to take on a challenge that you really are intrinsically motivated to do, whether it's domestic violence, like we did a pandemic plan for the homeless, something that really will engage you, even if your test is a complete disaster or it doesn't go the way you think. So the challenge with the dash is to try to figure out that proper starting point and to probably have a discussion with the group on what we were going to do. Yep.
I finished those two, so I was hoping you could look at it.
Okay. Yeah. Can I look at it after I get done?
Okay.
Okay. What are you going to do next?
Punch.
Hey, wait. Punch. What are you going to do next?
I only did those two, and now I'm going to do my finance. Hang on. You shouldn't laugh. Let's go back in June.
Alden, I'm in the middle of doing something, bud. I know you want to reverse the video, but I've got to do this.
It's really easy.
You want to reverse the video? Okay.
It's really
You really don't like it when I'm facing this way. You want to mirror it.
See?
Okay. Thank you for doing that. Go do your finance now, bud. Please.
Sometimes I think it's weird that you don't do that.
I know. I just don't think about it. Okay. So that's at least the backdrop for starting this out, is that, okay, discount what you're going to do in the front, but let's get to brass tacks about what people are interested in exploring for an experiment for the Write It, or for basically going to this. And this is where I'm going to kind of start going into the pretotyping stage of things and the experimentation and some things I saw with this. So we actually did some demos on the GVDS on trying to have people who had never done experimentation before in this thing to test the market, to try it out. And we actually went in a lot of different directions. But the thing that was constant throughout all the teams were these open-ended questions about which particular experiment to do. So I'm going to put these here in terms of like open questions. So the book basically has a lot of different experiments you can try. There is things where there's like the fake door, there's the one night stand, there's the MVP. I mean, there's all sorts of examples that Alberto has in there to kind of do and which one you want to figure out. So there was that. There's also the notion of, when and where to do an experiment. Now, the examples that are given in the book are about like, day-old sushi and how you're going to be engaging in market. But there were particular times where it may be more advantageous to kind of have that versus others. For the kinds of experiments we ran in the GVDS, we had these notion that we were going to run things for 24 to 48 hours, but the execution or how we were going to do it was open-ended, meaning like, are we supposed to just do it for 4 hours? Or supposed to do it for 5 hours? How much data is actually relevant? When you get a sign up, is that all we need? So we were trying to figure out what the parameters are. The other thing that kind of crept into it when we started doing it was the believability of it. So the believability of the experiments was something that to Alberto's point, it basically will influence whether or not you're going to fall victim to the beast of market failure, or if you're actually going to have something that has tangibility. But because a lot of designers were part of this experiment, this notion that you had to get the design somewhat believable, or it wasn't something that just somebody ginned up and tried to get an experiment with, that was going to highly influence how people were going to engage the model, or at least the experiment. So these three factors kind of, there you go. It's perfect. So these three things kind of crept into the conversation as we were going through the motions of building our own experiments. And I wanted to try to address those in a way that made it easier for people to bridge that gap of being able to take what was in the book and actually execute it. The final thing I'll put here is, and this is something that plagues both design sprints and to a certain extent pretotyping, is inheritance. And I'm going to explain that. I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle here and give it a different color. So when you're doing virtual sprints, and probably when you're doing sprints in general, there's this notion on day one that you're going to do the sprint questions, the long-term goal, and what's the third one? It's the how my we's, I think, are phrased, but there's the set of data that says we're going to ask these questions now, so that when we get done with testing at the end of the design sprint, we're going to figure out if we were right. But what I've been noticing is that you may set those things on Monday, but unless somebody keeps them top of mind and continues to pound them on Tuesday and Wednesday throughout the design sprint, the evolvement of the thought around the idea space and the ideation morphs and changes over time. And people tend to just basically concentrate on what's in front of them when they're doing ideation. Like they're saying, okay, here's my anchor. I'm going to go ahead and ideate and do a whole bunch of different stuff. And then I'm going to vote on this stuff. And then I'm going to think of outcomes and so on. But usually what happens, and this I'd say about half the time, what you end up with doesn't seem to align with what you start with. You just go in a different direction because you're learning as you're going. You're getting more perspective from your team members. And I see this kind of where they try to square the circle. They try to go, okay, we got to try to make it work and bring it back to what we were trying to do. And unless that's at the forefront, every single time you get into an engagement of some type with ideation or solution sketching, you sometimes end up with something that doesn't quite align with what you were meant to do in the first place. And that has implications for everything downstream. So when I took that inheritance model and I put it into pretotyping, saying that if we're going to address a certain part of the market and we're going to kind of do experiments, it's really important to make sure that you understand, if you're doing a point system or otherwise, that when you create an experiment, you're not just basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying this entire thing is done, but trying to get the habit of saying that maybe there's a few tweaks in there. If there's some resemblance of success, like some in market engagement, that you continue the inheritance of the original idea until the original idea seems to be like proven out, like the hypothesis doesn't work. Because the tendency in the experiments we did is that once something didn't work, like it didn't get enough signups or didn't get enough payment, the whole thing was tossed. It was like, oh, the whole thing's a failure. But it's that thinking needed to be kind of reinforced through the process. So this is the entire backdrop for the thinking around the dash, is that there's all these different things that are pushing and pulling it. What I'm going to do next is kind of go into some other murals that kind of set up some of the exercises that we went through the process. And rather than stop and take questions here, I'm going to just go right into it, and we'll probably end sometime around 35 after and leave the rest for, Sandy, for us to kind of talk about it. You get your impressions and you could tell me if I'm crazy or if I need to, stop babbling like I've asked you. Okay. So what I'm going to be showing here is this is going to be the dash canvas. So this was a borrowing of the team canvas, and these are the people that volunteered their time this week for the dash week to kind of try this out. Now, and I'm going to go through this briefly since this isn't part of the actual dash, but it's meant to set it up. Mehmet Caracas, who is our 2020 MVP for the GVDS, brought this format to the table, no pun intended with this, around getting everybody on the same page about personal goals, common goals, team norms, and values. These are all the people that joined in this week. I can go through them all. Graham is down in South Africa. He's an innovation coach. Lisa Weinsberger is somebody I'm a big fan of. She's a brilliant facilitator. Amir's in Austin. Very, very great with development, kind of being able to see things from all perspective. And then it just goes down the list. There's Gisela, Daniel. I know all of these folks, and I'm really blessed to have so many smart people in the same room to kind of explain this, and especially Alex, Florian, Jamie, all of them. But we use this to kind of get together and be on the same page with things. Excuse me, my consultant wants to talk again.
What's the next thing I have to do? I've done 4 things.
All right. So what do you want to do digitally?
Access 360.
Do you want to read for 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, go read for 30 minutes.
And then that's going to be my 5th one. And then my 6th one is going to be
The Hour of Code.
Duolingo with my other digital.
You did Duolingo for 2 hours this morning.
Okay, fine. That doesn't. So that's going to be my amazing.
It could be, but your hour code, your hour code has to be done. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. There you go. So what I attempted to do with this team canvas is to kind of repurpose it. So when we went through this, the values, the team norms, and everything else were good to kind of be on the same page of, but we changed it to a retrospective kind of look. So it was I wish, I wonder, and I ate. And we're going to put this through the motions in next week when we do a dash day on Monday to see how this goes versus the other one. So it's almost like we're experimenting as we go along. So the thing that you're looking for, I'm not really sure I've got the right one kind of posted up because I want to go through each day. Hang on a minute. I may have lost it. If I did, I'll bring it up. Let's make sure. Yep. Okay. Let me go back one.
There's a lot of tabs there.
Yeah. Welcome to my world of open tabs. There's plenty to choose from. Let's see. I am looking for the most comprehensive one. Give me 1 second.
Would that be the one that you shared with me before?
I think so. There's one that I had up in that was version 3, but I don't see it. Maybe it's a template. Hang on. Sorry, folks. I thought I had it up as an actual tab save, but it looks like it didn't. Maybe it's this. Bump, 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 bump. Yeah, I'm realizing that actually singing doesn't do anybody any good. Yeah, okay, this is it. So let's go into the dash itself. This is the first pass at it. So how it works is that basically you ask a particular question, like what kind of problems or challenges are you dealing with? And you can basically make this any kind of question you want. You start with an ideation phase of generating a lot of ideas and going and picking the ones that seem the most intriguing, like a top 3. Then we do something called storytelling, where we tell a story about a particular idea, meaning that you take an idea that you really like and take a real world example of how that would actually play out. And for this first version, we had people sketch out what the most important moment was. So something with stick figures, something that would kind of illustrate and start asking some particular questions about who, where, why, and how. And then we will get into the pretotyping method of experimentation, taking what you had done in storytelling and refining it for a market engagement hypothesis, and then building something with prototypes. And then finally, experimenting with them. We have I'm going to show you a kind of a template that shows how to kind of do a point system that correlates with some of the experiments you had, and it comes right from out of the Alberto's book. So I'll kind of go through each of the particular sections, and then we'll shut it down for some feedback and some perspective. So what I'm showing you is the first version, and let me go to this. So this is a filled out one that we did with the team. So they went through the motions of kind of going, and we actually changed this on the fly, where it's what would be a really interesting question to explore. So we didn't necessarily try to have a declaration to answer a question, but to actually have the question as like the thing that we lead with. And I'm going to show the votes for these. So we basically did a heat map of the questions, and we chose three that kind of seemed to stick out. Now, when we did here is we tried an experiment where we had all three over here, and then people can pick and choose which questions they wanted to answer. This became chaotic because people weren't necessarily, they were losing their bearings in terms of where the anchor was versus what the answer was. But we still went through and voted on them and we made the correlations between the questions and the ideas. From there, you go into outcomes, like what would be an amazing outcome for the idea that you're thinking about, and kind of having people choose which one those are. And then they had outcomes, and we voted on that. Finally, we would do something that Sandy and I are very familiar with. We use an Eisenhower matrix. And based on impact and interest, we had people rank where they wanted to take things, or which ideas were the most appealing, the idea outcome set. And we put their names in dots and then put them in places where they felt that they were interested in. And we basically use this as a heat map to figure out where the interest is. So blue has a high interest and a high impact perception around that idea, whereas the tan one's probably in a close second. But like most things we were doing here, we decided to kind of iterate on this. And as we did these iterations, I would go back to the team and ask them what they thought of these new variations. So let me bring up day one, version 3. And so this is the recasting of it. So we still kept the question, the really interesting question to explore, but based on the way people were engaging with the model, we now have things in their own verticals. So the question itself had its own ideation, but now it's compartmentalized so that it's specifically like sectioned out. The outcomes are also kind of in that linear form, though we're not sure if there's going to be 2 top voted ideas for each question. We just made room for it. And then the Eisenhower matrix, whoa, get back here, is now changed. So it's going to be market potential in your time. And this again, leans towards pretotyping, in that if you're putting your skin in the game to be part of this endeavor, how much of your time would you be willing to invest in any of these ideas? The market potential is speculative because you're not quite sure yet. But it gauges personal intrinsic motivation. So we changed the matrix to be time and market, which I think is going to be more indicative of really measuring the intrinsic motivation or the interest of the individual without really declaring it outright. So this is an example of taking the experiences of day one and rejiggering this entire thing to set up for day 2, which is going to be about creation. And I'll get into that one. That'll be the, oops, that's not it. Where did that go? Maybe it's back here. Nope. Okay, give me a minute. I'm going to have to search for it again. So day 2 was all about basically creating and being able to take sketches of what you had in your idea and kind of making them real. So here it is right here. So on day 2, what we attempted to do with this is to take the ideas that we had and start writing stories about them. So this is it looks really complicated because it was, in the sense that you would put down your top voted idea and outcome, and you would literally take a story spine and write out from the beginning to end how you saw this playing out. What I didn't do is actually say this as is and be very specific, saying this is supposed to be a real world example. Some people basically were very atmospheric about their choices in terms of how they did it, but they still were pretty serious. And about half of them surprisingly, took personal experience and projected it out into the story as an example. We had them pick out a particular moment, whether it was the event or the culmination or some other part, where it was the most influential or the most important for the character, and then we had them draw out this particular moment. And what we found was that people did this really rushed, and they kind of just took what they could find. And it was these questions down here which would eventually feed the market engagement hypothesis around who's featured in the moment, what are they doing, and had them kind of put this here. This seemed to be the thing that really carried people forward. So for day 2, we actually ditched, and when we look back at it, we ditched this entire sketching process and we redid this part. Okay. So what I'm communicating is that for each day we iterated after doing the exercise to say, okay, what seems to be more, what seems to be a better use of everyone's time. So I'll go through the rest of it. So that's what it looks like. It looked like before. Then I'll go through the rest of the dash really fast. After you get done with kind of figuring out your story, we would use this model to kind of refine the engagement parameters for market testing. So they would take what they had done in their story and then recast it in terms of a smaller increments, because the habits of people that do this in the very beginning tend to be more broad, like very far reaching. So we wanted to kind of have people kind of hypo-zoom, as Alberto says, and kind of get to real specifics around what people do. And for an experiment, we tried doing this with when, where, who, and what. And what we found is that when we took this out of the story, it didn't translate. So this is being redone as well, but this was our first attempt at it. Then from there, you take and start piecing together all the work you've done previously. And again, there's that inheritance thing, bringing it back into a market engagement hypothesis where you take all of these things that you've worked out and kind of figured out and put them in a comprehensive sentence. The idea is that if it didn't quite work, you could actually manipulate these a little so that it read better and it made more sense when you were going to figure out what kind of pretotypes you were going to build. For the purposes of this dash process, we narrowed it down to 5. And I only say we did 5 just because these are the ones that seem to be the most that were the most engaging for beginners of the pretotyping process. They're the ones that people could really that were self-chosen in previous experiments. So I ran with these. The white boxes below here are just basically meant to allow people to speculate on different ideas for experiments, and then what you could do a vote to see which one seems to make the most sense. Finally, and it's going to be tested today when we meet after this particular remotely interesting episode, is to experiment with different pretotypes. But this is probably going to go away, and we're going to have the story here, the engagement, or the entire kind of map of what this is going to look like, who's going to be designing, developing, marketing, producing, and giving roles to it, just like you would do in a design sprint, like the maker, the stitcher, and so on, but be really explicit about what kind of role people would have. And then start setting up pretotypes based on the votes that happened in the previous step and what the results are, and kind of doing a point system based on what the book says about a point for every personal email, a point for every minute at a time, a local currency. And based on those points, you could continue to do experiments, but what you're trying to do is drive towards a set of like a particular pretotype that seems to elicit particular responses from the market and build upon those over a 24 to 48 hour period. So this entire thing emphasizes a very short time frame, so you don't spend too much time thinking about it and trying to get to what the design sprint process says is a Goldilocks effect. Just enough time to get something believable, but not so much that you're basically totally invested in it and spending too much time. Based on the results that happen on Thursday with this particular one, if we're doing like a week-long one, Friday would be kind of looking at the results, doing a retrospective, figuring out what seemed to make sense for the market and what would be tangible to do going forward. And that is a really high-level view, probably a detailed view of the dash process as it's been kind of drafted the first time around. And as I've shown previously, it is evolving over time. After this week, we're going to do one full day of it, and then we might do another run in a couple of weeks. It might even be featured in Mural Imagine, but we're getting close to something that I think is doable. But I am coming at it with the notion that I don't know everything, and I really need some of the extremely talented and smart people that I had showed you previously to give me perspective. And speaking of very experienced and talented, I'm going to turn this over to Sandy so I can stop talking.
so you can
And
breathe.
give me your impressions about what you've been seeing here, and then we can open it up to people who have been patiently waiting on Zoom and on YouTube.
Yeah, I really like how it has evolved, because I remember the first version you showed me, actually. I think it wasn't even any of these boards that you have showed me. And it's not that you just kind of do on the fly, you actually experiment it and then iterate along the way. I think it's really great. And also I really like how you play it out as a story part. I think that also resonates to people more in a sense. But at the same time, you are still making it very specific. Like you also like zoom it to very specific points, like who and where and what and so on. So that part I really like. Was wondering though, so how long is actually the whole process if we're going to do it like all together? I see that you sometimes break it down into multiple days. Sometimes you do it on one day.
So right now this week it's banked at 90 minutes. The first two sessions went 2 hours because there was a lot of dialogue back and forth about what people were experiencing and the friction they had with kind of working through the process. But it's meant to be 5 hours if it's optimized for like a conversation that happens before the dash and then going through the execution of it and having some dialogue. I think it's probably more realistic to just basically say it's going to be, you could probably, if you want to give it room to breathe, you could do it just a full day. So it's one day to kind of get it all done, just sanction a day to kind of like get it, completely through the gate and have your experiments set up and ready to go. But it was meant to kind of just, okay, if we were to realistically do this in less than a day, where there's maybe a lunch involved, you can stretch it to 6. That's the idea.
Interesting. So you mentioned that you also take out the sketch exercise, right?
Yes.
And yeah, go ahead.
No. You were going to say something. Go for it.
No, I was just curious, like, because it's just because that people had to, if I understood correctly, because the sketch was still rushed in a way, so then they couldn't really help in the situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's when we had a dialogue about it afterwards, the value that it added to the process didn't seem to make sense for a lot of them. It was where they were concentrating more on the story and trying to stay true to the idea and really sticking to that and concentrating on it. And my hope was when I did the sketch, it would be an open book to have a real open dialogue about what the idea was and how they thought about it and to give it life. And that was also my thought, because people always have said that I'm more execution driven. I don't give room for people to have a conversation. So I that's when I said, okay, let's make day 2 all about having conversations. No, they wanted nothing to do with that. And they said, I don't want to do sketching. I want to stick to the focus. I want to get to exactness. So I was like, okay. And I just kind of let it go and let people kind of go at it. The interesting thing is going to be on day 3, this part right here, where you're actually creating the market engagement hypothesis. There's some notion here that I may be adding too much into this and that people can really just go from here to here without any kind of build. But again, I have to have one more team kind of take this on to really see if it's a direct kind of link to this without doing
Could
it
you
without
zoom in a bit?
What's that?
Could you zoom in a bit?
Yeah, sorry. So the meh, as it's pronounced,
Meh.
I'd like to see different people say that. This takes and builds from all the other steps that you've done previously. The idea being that step 6 is where you hypozoomed a lot of this stuff to get more comprehensive around who you were serving, what they were doing, and what audience who you're going to try to engage with your pretotype. So that it's literally you just take all the bits and pieces and parse them together. There may be the possibility that the hypozooming may or may not happen, but the problem is that people tend to boil the ocean before they cook the spaghetti, meaning that they want to think in very broad terms about their idea because they see it, they're trying to cover every possible scenario, where they have to be taught or kind of even massaged into the idea that they just have to concentrate on one individual or one group or one particular aspect. that is reachable, that where the data, the distance to data, so to speak, is very close. So it's and the part of that involves a conversation with people. And I also found that when I was talking with people yesterday about this, that everyone else was kind of observing as I was kind of interrogating the other person about being a little bit too broad. So what happened is I started doing this, which is just, it's still in production right now because I'm trying to get it done before later, where the hypozooming has taken on a notion where you can go both small and broad, but you're going to try to figure out based on your original story where you fit in this model. Was your original hypothesis that you had done, or the original story, was it a specific day of time, a very specific reason, a specific action? If it was, maybe you're good to go to kind of go straight into building that meh. But if it's not, and you find that it's more on the bigger picture and longer and wider period of time, you can use the model to gauge like, okay, we need to get this exacting for an experiment. What do you actually do? So this is a bit of a walkthrough with this, and this hasn't been tested, but this is another attempt at kind of doing this. And then the idea is that the market engagement hypothesis still uses this. You can drag and drop the cards once you figure out what they are. So this is where I left off as a revision of this particular day and day 3. Whereas day 4, today in about 15 minutes, we're going to concentrate on the experiment part of it. But I mean, I'm going to get feedback on this and see what people think.
And do you do the experiments during the section then?
You do the experiments after the dash is done. So the idea is that you don't try to do the experiments in the same day, but you basically set into motion small groups of people that can do experiments where they have a set date they want to get the experiment done by, and they want to run the experiment for like a day or 2 days, something that would give them enough time to build it and also enough time to test it. So by the time Monday ends and Friday begins, that should be enough window space, or window space, but enough space to have them experiment with something and then come back and at the end of the week and see what happens. So you give people breathing room to kind of work at night, do deep work, figure out what they're doing, have Slack or Basecamp or something else to basically go back and forth and exchange notes and get perspective. But you have kind of lines in the sand on when certain things need to be done, and then you just kind of let the week kind of breathe from there.
Right. Cool. There are a few questions coming from the audience. I put it on our podcast mural.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe you could also answer them.
Why the 1 day limit? I wanted to challenge myself. That's all. Because
and challenge the participants.
Yes, yeah, and I want to torture them. No, there's always this. So, okay, I'm going to get on soapbox a little bit, but I'm going to be brief. So knock me off at 10 to the hour so that I don't go off. I'm a little annoyed by people who are so purist about process. The reason is because the environment and the market are totally contradicting that view. And I hear people who kind of like brush off like, oh, 1 day design sprint, oh, it can't be done, and this and that and this and that. But it's really it's great to have that opinion. But if the process worked for the person that was basically doing it, then that's exactly what it meant to be. They're still learning. They're still basically doing what they're supposed to do. But I kind of push back on the notion that you can't not take something that's been done and retrofit it and redesign it. So it may be where 1 day is too short, but I have to go through the motions and really to Pretotyping's philosophy, really get my own experience and my own data to figure out if that's the case, so I can speak with some reflection and some reference to it. So I guess the short answer for that question is just to see if it works, just to try it. That's all. And to thumb my nose at convention if convention seems to be something that is just saying it just can't be done.
You still have a minute left.
What's that?
You still have a minute left for your answer there.
No, I'm done. I'm done. Shutting up. My question is this. I'm really interested and have always been struggling with and how pretotyping and design sprints work together in a B2B context, because we have to blow our cover, at least to some of the B2B customers. Blow our cover, at least to some of the. Does the pretotyping framing of a fake help us to onboard B2B customers in order to get access to their customers, consumers, get believable data? It depends on if that fake is like a design sprint fake and that you're basically putting up something that's really interesting to working on and going through the motions to learn the process. If the goal is to learn the process and to really get used to how pretotyping works, then sure, you can do that. But if you're looking to influence a market outcome, like how a customer is going to engage you, there be more. My instinct would be is that there's more conversations to have about what their pain points are and what their outcomes are, because then your pretotype may not necessarily address those, but you can emulate where you can see things basically going. I hope that answered the question, but I think that you're asking whether or not this could be a provable kind of process that people could use, so that if you meet them halfway with what they want versus what they can learn, I think that's a good place to start. So if I didn't answer that question correctly, just comment back and I'll try to re-answer it. By the way, if you have questions for Sandy too, please post them. This isn't just about me right now. I hate being the spotlight person. I'd much rather be shared. Okay. You're on mute, Sandy, but that's okay. Yeah, you muted yourself like you don't even want to have a talk.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm done.
There's a question of, isn't there a risk that it will be perceived as a glorified LDJ with a pretotype at the end? I'm not really this is me. I don't really care what people think sometimes. So people can consume this and have all the opinions they want about it. What I'm more interested in is, can this help people adopt the pretotyping method in a way where they don't have to look at the book and try to figure out how to do it if they don't have any help? Because I sometimes feel, and I gave the reasons before, that there's this gulf between execution and understanding. And what I'm attempting to do with this is to try to bridge that gap in a way for designers and for creatives and professionals to practically do it. How that's going to be done, I don't know, but I'm going to continue this iterative loop of seeing what works and what doesn't, removing the friction and kind of getting to brass tacks about what people respond to intuitively and what seems to make sense in terms of process. So if to be honest with you, if I listened to opinions all the time, I'd never be where I'm at. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
But Sandy, I listen to every time because she usually calls me out on my crap and tells me that I don't know what I'm talking about. Any comments or other questions? Any kind of observations? I'm looking at the so Yasir. Oh, Yasir is the person that answered it. Thank you for answering the questions. I'm going to look at YouTube really fast because I know that there were a bunch of people that were over there before. And I'm going to pause my share.
Oh, there is one. I can copy that over.
Okay. What criteria do you use to select the 5 pretotypes from market testing? There's not a set amount of pretotypes that a team can do. It may correspond to bandwidth. I think the criteria would be what would be a more successful variation of the hypothesis that you could test with the market, given the parameters that you want to put in and what you're going to be putting time into. And Andy Davis commented that's important to drive value regardless of what the process is. If it's one day, all the better. Yeah, that's another way of saying it. It's probably a better way of saying it. Yes, Sabu, I have a new haircut. There's a story behind that, but I won't get into it. There was a miscommunication between me and my stylist. So yes, this is not by choice. Okay,
and I had a miscommunication between me and my stylist. That's why my hair is blue.
Oh, really? But you kept it for a while though, right?
Yeah, I did, because it became my identity for some reason. People saw me and then they realized like, oh, blue hair, Sandy, and then now I decided to keep it.
And it actually made its way into a logo, so it was still pretty useful, correct? So you never know how these things play out. Although I don't think my hair is going to actually give me any new fans. It's just going to be, okay, Robert has short hair. We can see more gray of it. Let's see. That was Maz Spork who asked the question about the B2B context. So Karsten Blau asks, I like the very structured approach, but it may be overwhelming for newbies. What do you think? Well, I'm certainly going to figure that out on Monday, because I'm going to ask people for 5 hours of their time, and I'm going to see this. There's this thing that happens in a virtual space, and it happened yesterday, where inadvertently people start, either they're tired or something else, especially in Europe, they're going to start going like this. And their hands are going to start creeping up and start literally physically massaging their brain and their face. And usually I can tell when the stare goes beyond the camera that they're out. So if we start in the morning and have people go through this, and by the third or fourth step, people are just kind of like, okay, I get it. Then there may be a little bit too much that I'm trying to ask for people cognitively, but we'll have to go through those motions. But to your point, it may be something where somebody who's completely fresh from pretotyping, just read the book, this may be a little overwhelming for them, especially if they don't know Mural, they don't know the tech, they don't know how to go online. Totally valid question to ask. So it may be where if you're new to things, it may require some videos, some Loom videos to kind of explain what's going to happen before it happens. So that there's some some staging for people that are completely new to this to kind of come into play. And Alex is here. Alex, who has been instrumental in giving some very, very great suggestions on how to improve what we're doing here.
But I think like the overwhelming of the structure or the process is always the same. Like, I mean, design sprints, when you run that with new people who has no idea what it is still overwhelming to them, right? Yeah. So in the end, it's also kind of like the facilitator's job to actually brief them what is going to happen, set the expectation and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Also, Alex mentioned that the experiments themselves need to be iterated as well, in my view. And for me, they cannot fail in any case. We should learn from them if our hypothesis were formulated in a correct way. Yeah, that's going to be part of our conversation today. Is like there's the set template in terms of iterating on the experiment, but is there a different way of showing how you tweak certain parts of that hypothesis so that when you re-engage the market for another 24 hours, does it change things? It's like putting your crab pot in another part of the ocean. You just have the same pot, but you move the location and you try to figure out the numbers from there. But yeah, I get what Alex is saying there. I'm just scrolling back. Yellow seems to be the theme today at the Scroll House. Yeah, maybe it is, and it's inadvertent. So I think that, yeah, and Yasir, we were 5 minutes late. Actually, we were more than that, but I'm glad you only said 5 minutes. I don't feel as guilty. Okay, I'm looking one last time on YouTube, and I think we've exhausted all the inquiries and questions. So Sandy, it's really your final word.
We're seeing your YouTube studio.
Yeah, I know. I'm very professional like that. So after you've been kind of I mean, you've been part of this entire conversation. So what would be some suggestions you would have in terms of how this thing is going? What are some from the outside looking in, how do you think this process could ideally work better or change in a way that could basically like make more sense for you?
I think it's a little bit hard for me to say because I have not really gone through the whole process yet. I have only seen the mural boards that you have shared with me and when you were talking about it, which actually I think next week I'm actually be joining your team to test this thing, and I would probably be able to give you better structured feedback on that.
Yeah.
One thing that it may be embedded there. I don't see it because, like I said, I have not really gone through the process. But one thing that I kind of missed is the XYZ thing. I think that is quite important. I don't know, that is something that always makes me feel it's the thing that makes the pretotype very different than any kind of just experiment thing. And I mean, it may be there. I just have not seen it, I guess.
So I purposely extracted it just because I wanted the emphasis to be more on the building of the hypothesis more so than the naming. But that isn't to say that I couldn't for Dash Day bring back the WXYZ that we did when we first started those, and then see how that anchors people with kind of understanding those are the key moments of it. So let's see how today plays out in the next couple of days, and then based on that, then I'll refine it for Dash Day and try to make this so that I'm being very, very aware of people's energy, so I don't sap it too much with all the experiments we're going to be doing. Cool. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Remotely Interesting and hearing me babble on for a while. I appreciate everyone that posted something up here. Karsten, Americo, Maz, Alex, Yasir, Khalil, especially with the emojis. Yeah, and if Alberto is watching, holy crap. That's all I gotta say. Diago, Christopher, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time out to kind of watch this and be part of it. If you missed it and you're watching this recording, do post up your questions and your comments for either Sandy and I about what you saw in this episode. Next week, next Thursday at noon, will be a brand new one. We'll be at, and I won't say the number because I can categorize what number is it going to be. Do you have suggestions for the show? Do send them our way. We'd love to hear from you. Until then, I hope you have a good weekend. Sandy, I hope
Or
you do as well.
if anyone wants to be in our show and you have a topic to share, approach us.
Yes. Yeah. If we're more than happy to kind of have those conversations about something remotely interesting, right? But all right, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Okay. Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, YouTube. Bye, Zoom. Bye,
Bye.
Sandy. See you. Bye. Do the wave like this. Okay.